And welcome to another exciting episode of The Energy That Surrounds Us. I'm your host, Michael, and you'll notice Carla is missing. She was gardening, and unfortunately, the heat got to her a little bit, so she's going to take some time to rest, recuperate. So, our thoughts and prayers go to her. With that being said, I have to gush a little bit about our guest tonight because I met her years ago and we were researching and just looking into cryptids like Mothman. And as life goes, sort of drifted a little bit, kept in touch here and there. But tonight we are joined by Allison, who has a totally new topic that I think y'all are going to totally love. So without further ado, Allison.
Hi. Hey, nice to be here. Yeah, so I am a professional weirdo. I write for AmericanGhostWalks.com, and I'm also a, a writer that is working on a book of her own, but also submits to different magazines and, of course, books. So we can talk about a book that just was just released in the beginning of this month that I have an essay in. But I also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com/paranormal women.
So that is very cool. So, what got you into the topic of paranormal women?
Well, you know what? I've always been interested in the paranormal. And as I started to get into it, though, what I noticed is that a lot of people, they are limited to what they see on TV. So, ghost hunters, ghost adventures, they model what they're doing in terms of paranormal investigation after what they see on TV, which is an okay place to start. But it in no way informs them about the world of psychical research, parapsychology, or paranormal research as it's been practiced in like the last 200 years or more. So when you take what is on TV for the truth, you're missing a lot. You're missing at least half of what there is to know, because what you see on TV is very much male dominated. And when you look to the field, even in your own personal experience that we were talking about off air, Michael, uh, you have to admit, it seems that there might even be more women involved in the paranormal than men. What do you have to say about that?
I would say that I feel that's true in regards of I know several female paranormal investigators. Now, some of them you may have seen on TV programs, but most of them not.
Right.
And most of my friends that I investigate with are not on TV, and we all talk about the TV shows, but yeah, we always are when we talk about the shows, talking about the guys that are on there and what they did, and rarely talk about what the women did. So you're right about that.
Yeah, and that's not your fault. That's the way that media is steering us, because they will represent paranormal research as kind of a macho pursuit, when in reality that's not what it's been uh, throughout history. It and in terms of women being involved in the paranormal, well, everybody seems to think that women have a certain place, and certainly I think people realize that there are women who are mediums, and there are women who are psychics, for example, and there seems to be acceptance in terms of that role, but it's lacking when you think about women as investigators, that's not portrayed as much. It's like, women are thought to be more of a conduit for the supernatural than someone that comes from the inside or the outside rather to investigate it. And I really find that to be a problem because although I do acknowledge, yeah, there are a lot of females who are mediums. There's also a lot of females who aren't mediums like myself who are interested in looking at the paranormal from a scientific perspective, and that's been neglected. And I think the big picture is that we're not reading books. I think that's a problem. And in the paranormal field, we don't know a lot about the history of the paranormal field. And so that is what's allowing the media to portray it as a masculine pursuit,
Yeah.
because we don't know enough to challenge that. But in my own experience, I realized that I didn't know enough women involved in the paranormal. And I didn't want to go to obvious figures or just people that I knew. I wanted to look into the history, and I was startled when I found that we use the term poltergeist all the time, right?
Right. Or
And
demon.
what was that?
I said or demon.
Right. But the term poltergeist, nobody realizes that we are using that term today and throughout the field because of a woman. Did you know that, Michael?
So I know it was a little girl in the movie, but that's the only frame of reference I could say as
Yeah.
to the origin of that.
Again, that's a female portrayed as a victim. And then in that movie, there's also a female portrayed as a medium. But again, you don't see somebody coming in really from an investigator perspective
Right.
that has any power anywhere. There is a female in the movie in that investigative role, but she is ineffectual, being the head of a university parapsychology department. But it's cool to see that a woman was featured, and I think that was modeled after Thelma Moss, who was the head of UCLA's parapsychology department, which was a short-lived department, but quite famous for about a decade. And if you subscribe to my channel, you can watch a whole playlist based on Thelma Moss and her contributions to the field, some of the famous people that she worked with and inspired. So there's a lot of women and some amazing things that they've done. Getting back to the woman who brought us the term poltergeist, there's a woman named Catherine Crowe, and she wrote a book called The Night Side of Nature, which is a 400-page book that talks about every kind of ghost you can think of, uh, as well as OBE, NDE, twin telepathy. Really, it's a smorgasbord of the paranormal. And she is the one who brought us the term poltergeist. And the reason she could do that is because she was multilingual. She grew up in England. She spoke English, but she also spoke French and German. And she wrote this book called The Night Side of Nature in 1848. And it became an international runaway bestseller. And that's because what else happened in 1848? Well, that's when the spiritualist movement kicked off. And it just so happened that her book came out at the most opportune time. And so that book became really an influence on Victorian culture and how important the ghost was to Victorian culture, because she was a Victorian writer. Now, it's amazing, though, that she was able to synthesize her reading in German and French and bring some of those paranormal phenomena to the English speaking audience. And then she looked for antecedents or she looked for similar manifestations that were happening in her own country to the things that were being reported on in Germany and France. And the people who really inspired her were German scientists and doctors who, at the time, there was a whole movement of these incredibly intelligent people who were studying medicine, but then also finding it intersecting with the paranormal. And the first thing that she did was she read a book by Justinus Kerner, who was a poet and a physician, and he is actually the person who identified botulism toxin. So, I mean, that's really important that we know what that is today because of his work. But he also, as a doctor, he had a patient who was a very young woman, but very sickly. And he was doing all that he could to improve her quality of life, even though she was bedridden. But so he was at her side and noticed that she was in almost constant contact with the spirit world. And he was changed because of the things that he saw her do, the things that he saw her predict. He couldn't deny those things as a scientist when they were right in front of him. So he wrote a book called The Seerist of Prevorst in German. And so Catherine Crowe was like, this is an amazing book. And so she translated it into English. That was her first foray into the paranormal in 1845. And then in 1848, she came out with her own book, The Night Side of Nature. And there's so many amazing stories in there, but I bet you never heard of her before this conversation.
No, I haven't. And another thing, though, that I'd like to point out, being a history major, is in 1840s to 1900s, for a female to be an acclaimed author or even authorship was a major undertaking because society was like, nobody wants to read anything put out by a woman because unfortunately society at that time still had the demeanor of, well, women are less than the man, so unless a man writes it, we're not going to give it any time of day. So it's amazing that she was able to get 2 books published.
Yeah, well, she actually was a novelist, so she got a lot more books than that published. But yeah, some of her books were originally published not revealing that she was a woman. and then later that was revealed. But yeah, she was an extraordinary woman because this was a time when women had didn't have the right to vote. They also had limited property rights, and she actually left her husband in England and reinvented herself in Edinburgh, Scotland. And that's when she started to write, when she got her freedom, and just became such an amazing writer of mystery fiction and horror. She's one of the first people to write a story of a werewolf. So, and she wrote a lot of crime fiction as well. And our interest, of course, is in the paranormal, that she got so interested in the paranormal that, really became the central focus of her life.
Right. And it's incredible that she was able to do all of this too, because in England, I know for a fact in England, for a woman to be educated, that was even extremely rare. So the fact that she has all this background knowledge speaks to her character of defying the odds of, she most likely educated herself because universities and colleges at that time rarely accepted women
Yeah.
into what was deemed as masculine studies like science, math.
Yeah, that's so true. And the fact that she could do what a lot of researchers who have more opportunities aren't doing today is learn not just a second language but a third language, and to be able to be so proficient in it that you can actually translate a text, and that you can synthesize what you're reading from different authorities in those different countries and bring it to your own people.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. And I think you're right. It's a part of the history of the field that, I mean, most people, I think if you were to ask today, say, who started the paranormal field, they would probably say names like Hans Holzer or the Warrens.
Right.
And granted, she was given a lot of popularity and credit, so there was that. But yeah, a lot of people though tend to remember Ed more than Lorraine, and
Right.
so
Well, and she was again given more of a mediumistic role. I mean, she did in the movies she's made out to be more of an investigator, and that's great. But I'd like to see a lot more uh, fact-based offerings about some of these women, less of the Hollywood schlock and more of what they actually did contribute. And I mean, you just don't see that. You see everything that's done in the paranormal done for entertainment. And unfortunately, that's where the money is right now. I have a lot of friends who are parapsychologists, or their training is in parapsychology, and it's very hard to make a living doing that. And hey, I'm a prime example of that. I mean, my brother and I, we always wanted to be parapsychologists, and we just saw that that's not going to be a very good course of action, because you're really few and far between can get an actual profitable career going in that. And even the people who are well known might not even be making as much as they could be making in other fields. So we decided that we would go into the paranormal entertainment field. That's why we have American Ghost Walks. And but in what we do our best to look at things through the lens of comparative folklore, comparative mythology, uh, and of course, we make sure that everything we do is researched. And if there is any doubt about certain places really being haunted, well, we tell you right out. If a place is purported to be haunted, but we find no evidence that it actually is. I mean, that's a hard pill to swallow in the paranormal. Everybody wants everything to be haunted. But as an investigator, that's not investigating. You have to separate the wheat from the chaff. But
well, that
anyway, I'm
yeah,
sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying. You mentioned ghost walks. I At first, when I thought of ghost walk, I was thinking, oh, this is like a hayride Halloween thing. And so I never really gave him any credence. And then I did a ghost walk tour in Key West.
Mm-hmm.
I did one in Jefferson. And I was like actually impressed of how much actual paranormal history you get on these ghost walks of locations. And I've started calling them, like, going, yeah, if I'm going to do a ghost walk, I'm like, if somebody goes, well, why are you doing that? I'm like, because I'm scouting. I use them for scouting. For
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So instead of ghost walks, a lot of times we refer to what we do as haunted history. And it's important. Like, if there was no history, there would be no ghosts. So,
right.
uh, you know, sometimes people that come on the tours, they think it's going to be a ha ha Halloween kind of thing, and they don't really realize that no, history is an important part of the of paranormal research. You don't have anything if you don't have knowledge of the past.
Right.
So yeah, it's not a haunted house. It's not Hollywood schlock. It's the real history, and we run across things that you really can't explain. And so, I mean, that is what does it for me. I love to find things where right now there is no explanation. So maybe we can talk a little bit about this book I'm in a little bit, because that's where I got to explore some of the unknown. But yeah, so if you let's finish up first talking about the channel. If you're interested in the full picture of the paranormal, so I'm talking about getting the female perspective. You already have a lot of the male perspective, and male researchers are great, but in this world, who wants a limited view, who wants to only see half the picture?
Right.
And the channel is about balancing things out, and it's also about learning your history. And in the paranormal, there were many women that set the foundation for the paranormal as we know it today. For example, going back to Catherine Crowe, it's just amazing that not more people that more people don't know about her, because in my research I found that as far as investigating paranormal investigation as we do it today, she was the first one. She was the pioneer of that. In 1854, she conducted what I believe is the first ghost hunt. Now, do I mean that nobody in history ever peeked around the corner or ever wondered about ghosts or ever went into a grave yard at night and looked for ghosts? No, I don't mean that. Obviously, I'm sure a lot of people did that and a lot of people had questions about it. But when you think about systematic paranormal research, that was really what Catherine Crowe brought to it. And when you look at earlier efforts to investigate the paranormal, they were conducted in a very religious context. And they were looking to root out witches and punish them. and, uh, and they were looking for manifestations of the devil on earth
Right.
as a way to intensify the faith, their Christian faith. And they were looking to root out evil. They weren't approaching the paranormal as we do today with an open mind and looking more towards investigation than exorcism. Do you understand what I mean by that, Michael?
I do,
Yeah.
and I like how you're putting it to where they're rooting out evil or Satan. Because to me, I always say they were rooting out anything they didn't like. If they
Yeah.
didn't like that, they would write it up as if this is devil worship or this is
Right.
wrong. And it's like, yeah, so many basic things like, study of nature, knowing what herbs or what plants around you that could help you was lost because the Catholics were like, no, this is, if God didn't heal you, then there's no way man could heal you. So this is devil work. And they were tried and convicted as witches. And it's like so much history and so much, I would almost go to say evolutionary skills that we had were lost
Hmm.
because of the mainstream religions going fanatical.
And hundreds of thousands of people, mostly women, were killed in those witch hunts.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest proponents of witch hunts was Joseph Glanville, and he is somebody that's credited today with being the first ghost hunter. And I would object to that because although, yes, he interviewed witnesses, he did stay at a purported haunted location. His conclusion was that the poltergeist activity, well, of course, he didn't call it poltergeist activity, but the impish activity was due to a witch. So his writings uh, were an inspiration for the Salem witch trials, for example. So, do we really want to be celebrating a witch hunter who was, again, only investigating the paranormal to force his faith on people, and looking for people to punish because he felt like witchcraft was a real thing, and these people were in league with Satan, and they needed to be put down.
Yeah,
uh,
and I mean, like you said, with the Salem witch trials, it's sad to find out now that the majority of the women that were tried and killed were because one, they refused the advances of a man, or two, they were like to inherit land that somebody wanted,
yeah,
and so it was like the quickest way to get rid of them was say, "Oh, she's a witch," and then you'd pay the judge off, and the judge would rule in your favor that yes, she's a witch, and lo and behold, you got the land, and everyone's like turns a blind eye to this blatancy of corruption.
right.
It's
And
they were only getting the witches out. It's like, do
right.
you not see who's profiting from these witch trials?
Yes, it was a blatant land grab. And yeah, I mean, it was uh they were able to do it because these people, mainly women, were powerless.
Right.
And especially when you made that allegation, there was really nothing you could do. That was the trump card, and there's no way you could get out of it.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I mean Monty Python, for as much as being, anti female show as it is, making fun of stuff. In the movie Holy Grail, I love the part where they say, "How can you tell she's a witch?" Well, she'll sink. Well, the guy goes, "Well, what if she doesn't?" He goes, "Well, then she's made of wood." He goes, "Well, what else floats in water?" They're like, "Well, it's wood, so she's got to be a witch." He's like, and then the king walks in and goes, "A duck does." And they're like, he's like, "There's an educated man," and it's like that. That was the showing. I think the mentality of the day was you either sank and you were thought a witch, or you floated and were thought a witch. There was a no-win scenario for these
Right.
people.
Right. As a no-win scenario. That's a good way to put it. So I don't look at somebody like Joseph Glanville as a role model or somebody who was really a paranormal investigator. So Catherine Crowe, on the other hand, she went at it from a rather secular position. I mean, when you read The Night Side of Nature, she definitely does talk about religion because that was a very important part of the belief systems at that time. But when she went on the investigation, what did she do? She brought along a clairvoyant, and this person was a clairvoyant, but only under hypnosis. So she brought along a clairvoyant and didn't only told her that they were looking to buy a house, and they were bringing her along uh, to tell them, to advise them with her psychic skills as to whether they should buy the house or not. So, I mean, I do think it was a little suspicious when they came to pick up this woman at 11 p.m. at night. And at midnight, they were in this house. You would think it was like just a real estate deal. They would have gone during the day. I don't know how she talked around that. But the fact is, she was bringing in a clairvoyant and using single blind, not telling that person what they were going to do, and not telling them anything about the property. And so she brought uh, herself, this investigator, of course, the doctor who performed the hypnosis, and also a couple of other men that she felt were very trustworthy to go with her. And they went to this house in Edinburgh, Scotland, that Catherine Crowe had found out about because of her book, The Night Side of Nature. So her book came out in 1848. This was 1854. And so she would get tips. People would write her about different strange things going on in their lives, and she found out about this haunted house that couldn't keep renters, and she was able to convince the owner to let them come in and investigate. And so they hypnotized the clairvoyant, and they just asked general questions about whether they should buy the house. And she told them that no, it was haunted and it was the scene of a murder. And now Catherine Crowe was disappointed by the results of the investigation. She, I think, expected, like a lot of us when we go on paranormal investigations, we have out of whack expectations as far as what we want to happen.
Right.
And we're even worse than she is, probably, because we have the Hollywood movies. We expect the bleeding walls, and so she didn't get any bleeding walls either. But what I do think that maybe she didn't appreciate enough was they did see some strange light phenomena. They heard some strange noises, which they couldn't account for, and it wasn't like mice or anything like that. It was like there was like a metal clanging sound that came about near the door. And then this light phenomena persisted, coming through the floorboards. And at first she didn't see it, but the psychic was pointing out that there were lights. And so she took the hand of the psychic and then this medium, and then she could see it. And Catherine Crowe kicked herself after, because she thought, well, they should have gone around and had all the investigators hold her hand and see if they could see the light phenomena as well. So they saw these lights emanating from the floor, and they were pulsating. And then Catherine Crowe, on her own, did see like a bright spark, like a diamond of light. Like uh, like if you ever have lit magnesium on fire, that kind of brightness.
Right. The bright
Um,
blue spark.
yeah, and so she saw that, and then after the investigation, they had a little debriefing, and it was revealed that somebody else in the party also. She said, "Well, what did you see?" And he described the light, it in exactly the same way as she had thought of it in her head. So I think for a first investigation, that's pretty great.
I know, and I mean, it's kind of like you say, is we go in and we're all, sit there and we'll hear like creaks in the building or what sounds like, the metal clanging, for example. And we're taught first reaction is, oh, that's just the building settling or the house settling. So we write it off. And it's like, we really got to unprogram that to going, like you're saying, so wait, let's go see where that sound's coming from. What's causing that? Can we reproduce it?
Right, exactly. And it's interesting that preceded the lights coming through the floor. So maybe those things are connected, maybe not. But
Yeah,
it's interesting that she had light phenomena, and it's just exciting to see that, to see those roots of paranormal investigation and
yeah,
where they started.
And what's even more amazing is, I mean, being a history major, I may be a little off on my timetables, but electricity wasn't commonplace yet. So to have light coming up from the floor would mean there would have to be a fire or be candlelight somewhere. So candlelight would not be enough to shine through the boards,
Right.
kind of the way she's describing. So you really would have to say, what is this light? Because we would be like today going, oh, it could be a flashlight. It could be, someone let the light on downstairs. But they didn't have all that.
No.
So that's what makes it even more like going in today's eye, looking back, going, why did you go down to see what was making the light?
Well, my understanding is that it was they were on the ground floor,
Right.
and so there's nothing, there's the earth beneath them. So
Yeah.
how would there be lights coming up from the earth? Not impossible, but
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to have heard if she said, yeah, we pulled up a board and, we found just the ground. And you could say, wow, so then that light really was paranormal. But as long as, because you're left with wondering what's under the floor, is there a gap that, a secret area that nobody knew about? And that's where the light came from. And it's like, using today's mind, looking back at all these stories, yeah, it is funny to sit here and think this is where we came from to where we are today, and going, yeah, but this is the person who first had the notion to even go and try something to where we're like, this is, basics. Yeah, everybody knows, from everything going, yeah, if you go and you see something, you try and track it down. Well, they didn't know back then. If you saw something, they might be sitting there saying, yeah, there's a light at the coming up from the floor, but, you know, in the 1800s, what would you be thinking was underneath the floor of a house? Not heaven. So
yeah,
you'd be like,
yeah.
oh, I don't want to open this up and see what's coming.
Right. Well, yeah, that's an interesting thought, but yeah, it's a mystery, and I really think that Catherine would have done more investigations. This was her first foray into it, but that very same year, I'm gonna leave it to you guys to go on my website and see what happened to her. One of the
So
reasons maybe we don't know as much about her as we should is because that very same year she was scandalized unjustly by still some still someone who is one of the most famous men in history, and so I'll just leave that to you. That's kind of a cliffhanger for you to go and watch the video on the scandal that's still haunting Catherine Crowe over 150 years later.
and just FYI to everyone that's watching this, whether you're watching it live or replay or on the radio listening, the website that she's referring to is in the description. So I put it in the description of the YouTube channel, the Facebook events. So everywhere you're listening to it, you should have a link to both the her website, and if you go on the timeline, my timeline, there is on the reminder of tonight's episode a YouTube that she recommends for everyone to watch.
Right. So that specific YouTube video is the rest of the story. So if you're intrigued about Catherine Crowe and you want to find out what happened to her, um, and why maybe she didn't do more paranormal investigations after this first one, because she certainly had inclinations to, and she certainly wished there were things that she would have done differently, like she wished that she would have standardized that approach with the other members of the team, where the she reached out to grasp the medium's hand, and then she saw the lights. She was wishing that she would have had everybody on the team do that one by one and see what the results were of that. So she certainly had inclinations to improve her technique, but why didn't she? Well, if you want to know, then go ahead and watch that video in the show the show notes, and I think you'll be quite surprised, and maybe you change your mind about many things after
Right.
watching that video. But yeah, I'd welcome people to watch a whole playlist on Catherine Crowe. I have another great playlist on Thelma Moss, who was the head of UCLA's parapsychology lab from, I think it was 68 to 78 approximately. She has so many amazing stories about famous people that she rubbed shoulders with, and her contributions are vast.
Mm.
I would also invite have a playlist on someone I'm going to make more videos about soon, which is Zora Neale Hurston, who is better known as a novelist. Uh, and she was almost totally forgotten, but is now quite popular in terms of novels like Their Eyes Were Watching God. That's her most famous. But many people don't realize that she was also a folklorist and an anthropologist, somebody who embedded herself in voodoo culture. So I talk a lot about her discoveries and some just miraculous things, strange things that happened to her when she was investigating the paranormal in the Deep South, and also the Bahamas, and Jamaica, and of course Haiti. Her book, Tell My Horse, has amazing stories about Haitian voodoo, Jamaican ghosts. Uh, there's a lot of things out there, and I think what you don't know will amaze you if you take time to go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/paranormal women, and watch a few of those videos. See how they change you.
Most definitely. And, it's interesting that you bring up voodoo because, on a side tangent, I was just watching Unexplained earlier with William Shatner,
Mm-hmm.
and they were talking about rituals, and they mentioned voodoo. And everything I've read and everything about voodoo that I've come across has always been like for, um, doing harm to someone or clearing something out. But this story actually surprised me. Was there was this lady who was in England who started getting pains in her shoulder and was losing mobility in her arm, and doctors couldn't explain it because nothing showed up on x-rays or anything. She read about a voodoo priest in Haiti, flies to Haiti, stays in this guy's hotel, and he goes, "Oh, well, you have a cat on your shoulder," and starts doing something and says, "Okay, we've removed it." And she tells the story of, she's like, "Well, I don't know, if that's real or not." But then she starts to pick up a coffee with her right arm and realize she's putting the lid to this coffee on with her right arm, dragging her suitcase with her right arm, and going, "I have mobility in my right arm now. The pain is gone. I don't know what he did. I couldn't describe to you what he did." And I was like, I'd never thought about voodoo for healing something.
Oh yeah, I mean it's really Not to say it can't be used for evil purposes, but uh voodoo itself is a religion, and we have to afford it the same kind of respect that we have to afford other religions. And just like when you think about Christianity, hey, we were just talking about witch burning, and when you look back at the Crusades, there's a lot of negativity that has come
Right.
down to us from religion. So uh, the Judeo-Christian people, shouldn't really look down on another religion in terms of the evil that it does, because they should not be the one to cast the first stone, because they've done much the same.
Well,
So
then, what's interesting too, talking about the Judeo Christians, is if they were to look at, I mean, really look at their beliefs, their stories, and everything, they're all pieces of other religions that existed before them. So it's like they're a hodgepodge of, say, Sumerian, Celtic, pagan, Judaism. I mean, even probably Muslim is in there. And they put them all together and then pieced it out to be what they wanted it to be. And one of the biggest crimes, I think, and I'm probably going to catch flack for saying this, is that Christianity took us from a matriarchal system to a patriarchal system and totally tried to destroy the divine feminine side. And to me, that was like the worst thing that could have been done, because I mean, they talk about balance and you need the balance of the divine and everything, but yet then they're saying there's only the masculine, there's no
right.
feminine. But if you have balance, you got to have both.
And see, and that's all I'm fighting for with my Paranormal Women channel, is to even things out and make sure that we know our history, and we see the feminine foundations of this field, and we give it the full appreciation that it deserves. And I know we're coming to the end of the hour here, and I want to talk a little bit about the book if we
Yeah.
can.
We will. I just want to say one thing for your cause, though,
Yeah.
is in the past, say, 2, 3 years of paranormal television, the feminine has been returning, because you had like Nick Groff uses a lot of women investigators and mediums in his shows. Destination Fear, the main star, brought his sister on and gave her, the limelight a lot. And, she got to pick places in, 2 of the seasons, and out of the three, I believe they were, or 3 out of 4. But I mean, even Ghost Hunters, when they reinvented themselves, Sherry is now a part of the team as an investigator. And Ghost Hunters, when they brought in a new team, had 2 women on the team as an investigator, one being a psychologist. Actually, she might even be a parapsychologist. And so I would say, your goal of bringing awareness to it is actually rippling out more than you might realize, because a lot of the major shows nowadays all are starting to feature female investigators.
Well, I think, that's the only road, because, like we were saying, we want the full picture. We don't want to see just one side of things. That's
Right.
very limiting. So, I'm glad to hear that shows are doing that. And I hope they will continue to be more fact based, even if it means that they have to make it a little bit more down to earth than some of these shows have been. I want to see reality
Yeah.
reflected, not just some claptrap, and not just one-sided patriarchal nonsense. So I'm glad to hear
Yeah.
that it's making it a
You know,
turn for the better.
and it's kind of funny because we use so many colloquialisms and we don't know where they come from. And one just popped in my head because we were talking about Miss Crow and talking about with your statement about hoping they come keep it going is I found myself saying in my head, yeah, they're having to eat crow.
Very
And
good.
I'm
I
like,
like it.
she's getting her justice.
Right. She's really got to get her justice. She's been defamed, and I would really suggest that you check out the video in the show notes, especially, which will give you a different perspective, and really give you a good reason to elevate Catherine Crowe and to respect her. To make up for the past. But
Right.
yeah, let's talk about the book. So I'm excited. I'm in a book called Fairy Films, We Folk on the Big Screen, and it's edited by Joshua Cutchin. You might be familiar with some of his many books. He really takes a deep dive into a subject, and he's one of the leading authorities on fairy folklore. And in this book, a number of contributors write about fairy folklore and how it's still with us today in its traditional form. Now, we're not really talking about the sweet little Tinkerbells. We are talking about traditional fairies, which are a lot scarier. And you might not realize that fairies were uh, sometimes thought, like in Scotland, for example, um, to be the familiars of witches. So it wasn't imps from the devil, but it was that the witches were consorting with the fae folk. Uh, they've
Yeah,
also been
tricksters.
what was that?
Tricksters. I've
That's right.
always heard them as being the tricksters.
Yes, I would agree with you there. So they are very much tricksters, and they have been very feared in the past. I mean, that's why we call them fairies, the fair folk, the gentry, the good neighbors. The reason for that is you don't want to get on their bad side. So you want to talk about them euphemistically and also show them that, they can be good in what we think is good. It and so it was really important for people in the past in many countries, not just Ireland, but of course, Ireland was uh, a center of such beliefs and what's called the fairy faith. But many other countries share similar beliefs. Even countries in Asia, for example, or in Native America, Native Americans have little people. So, and the idea that we have about little people is they're small and sweet. I would say look to the boogeyman, for example. Do you think the boogeyman is sweet?
I know.
What do you think, Michael?
I would say as long as he gets what he wants, yes. But the
Well,
second you cross him, all bets are off.
yeah. So there's Stephen King's Boogeyman is coming out in June. So it would be perfect for people to get this book and to read my essay in particular, which is called Scary Fairies, Boogeymen of Yore. Because what people don't realize is, well, where does Boogeyman come from? Well, it comes from Bogart, Bogey, Boogie, Bugbear. These are fairies. The bogey was a type of fairy. And so when you talk about the boogeyman, that's an extension of that word. So many people wouldn't consider that a fairy, but that really is, because another thing that you might want to watch, if you haven't yet, it was very popular when it came out a few years ago, but Stephen King had another book called The Outsider,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's an amazing also adaptation on HBO Max, which is now just Max. So if you have Max, then check out The Outsider. That's a series based on a book by Stephen King called The Outsider, which deals with the origins of the boogeyman, and is super powerful. And I don't think it's giving anything away to say that, one of the key areas where this character of the outsider um, has power is he's able to make people see what isn't there. He's able to deceive, people's eyes. And that was, of course, one of the powers of the fairies, called glamour. Glamour
Right.
was the fairy ability to make you see something, to prevent you from seeing things as they actually are. And certainly that comes to play in The Outsider. So that's
Right.
something you got to check out. There's a lot of fairy tropes in there. And I wish that I would have written a little bit more about The Outsider. I did mention some of Stephen King's work, but I don't think I mentioned The Outsider in my essay, which would have been perfect because it's about boogeymen. And it's about real life cases, things that are still unexplained, of illness, strange maladies, and death. So I dug up actual accounts, unsolved mysteries about strange things that happened to people and didn't end well. And I talk about those and reference portrayals of certain things in films that are related. For example, did you know that that Nightmare on Elm Street was based on a true story?
Actually, I did because I just seen it on a special where Robert Englund, who plays Freddy, was saying, yeah, he was so thrilled to be able to bring this account into reality. And I was like, what? And had to look into it. And I was like, wow. I was surprised to see, yeah, that it was based on a true story.
Yes, well, I mean, there is no Freddy Krueger, but
Right.
Wes Craven was inspired to do the film because he was seeing all these articles back in the 80s about uh, men of Hmong heritage who had they were refugees from Vietnam. So the Vietnam War hit, the Hmong people supported our troops over there, and so we had to help them get out safely and give them sanctuary here in the United States. But unfortunately, as it came to the United States, this this epidemic of what is called by some sources nightmare death uh, proliferated among men in the community. And so I talk a lot about that and the details of not just the cases in the United States, in the continental United States, but earlier earlier cases of nightmare death in Hawaii among Filipino workers, and then there were also just an unbelievable amount of cases in Singapore as well. And the problem is these men, they go to sleep and they just don't wake up. And a lot of times, the people that are with them, if they're in a room with other people with their family, for example, or their wives. They're in the bed, and the wife is is actually awoken by the struggling of her husband. And in some cases, there was one case I read about where the man was being attacked in his sleep, and the uh, his friend who was sleeping in the same room uh, heard him struggling and was able to actually wake him up and save his life. But that wasn't usually the case.
Right.
Usually, these people are not able to be awakened. And today, scientists think that this is a genetic disorder called Brugada syndrome, and that it is a malfunction of sodium channels in the heart, which causes a severe arrhythmia. But the problem is, why does it spike? Why are there no cases for years and years and years? And then suddenly there there is a rush of cases. It can go from nothing, from 0 to 60. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so that is something that is a big curiosity, and I don't know how that can be explained. If it is a genetic disorder, then you would figure that it would play out um, in a certain sequence. It wouldn't have such dramatic spikes and then dips.
Well, if they're, I think that's why they call it genetic, because doing genealogy, I've started to figure out that there are traits that get passed down from generation to generation, and then there are traits that may go back 8 generations that then makes an appearance, and then it goes dormant again for say 5 generations. And so I think that's why they're starting to call things genetic, is because they can't explain how, like you're saying, it's pattern. And so they write it off as genetic because nobody can explain why you can have 5 generations of red hair, and then all of a sudden you're going to have one that's black hair, and then 2 blonde hairs, and then the red hair returns.
Right. But they seem to think that this is very rare in the population. But my question is, why do we usually not see it? And anytime we see it, it comes in like an epidemic. And then it disappears.
I think that could also be because people were brought up with such stigmas of, you want to keep people with their dignity. And so if somebody dies with this look of horror on their face, you're like, well, this man was beloved by people. We don't want the people to remember his last look was the look like he's seen the devil or something.
Right,
And
right.
so they will hush it up,
Sure. I
sweep it
get you
under the
there.
rug.
I get you there, but let me give you an example of what happened with the Hmong people. So, they came to the United States, and when they did, they were in very different living situations than they were used to. They When they were in their their native environs, their homes uh, were built around a central post, and that post was very important. It was where they conducted their ancestor worship and conducted sacrifices. While when you're in some crowded apartment, you don't have like a ceremonial space like they had built into their homes in their native environment. So they come to this country and they can't practice their rituals, and these rituals were to appease their ancestors. And the idea was that the ancestors will protect them from some of the scary fauna that's out there in on the other side. And they believe that there is a creature on the other side that if they don't make sacrifices, they don't get that elder protection that they need, or they don't get it as regularly as they need it. They're not able to call down their ancestral spirits to have that force field that they had in the old country. So what happens is some of these creatures are allowed to get through, and these creatures will come to them in the night and uh, suck the life out of them. That's what they believe traditionally. I'm not saying all Hmong people believe this, but I'm saying that was the traditional outlook to what is happening to these victims. And once, so there was an epidemic when they first got here, and then once more people from these communities were able um, to move out to farmland, more rural environments where they could conduct their rituals, and they had more space to go back to the old ways. Then the deaths stopped. So, and interestingly, another female researcher, I haven't made a video about her yet, but I will. She's an anthropologist named Shelley Adler, and she's done extensive work looking into these mysterious deaths. And uh, she looked into each individual one that occurred and found that they were all men except for one. One of the victims was a woman, but she was in the unique position because Hmong society is patriarchal. So she was in the unique position of being the head of the household. So she was the one who was victimized because she was the head of the household. And that's what was happening. The head of these households, all the heads of these households were being taken out. So it's interesting that this one woman also had died due to nightmare death when all the rest were men.
Yeah, that is interesting, and it's kind of interesting on a side note too, talking about nightmare deaths that I found. I don't know how familiar you are with astral travel. That there are times when, like, in doing astral traveling, like, if you feel yourself getting cut in the arm by something, you
Mm-hmm.
will wake up and you will have a cut in your arm, even though you were asleep. And
Yeah,
so I can't help wondering, you know, not only, with these being nightmare deaths, but could it also be that they were, some of them may have been astral traveling and, got hurt astral traveling and died, because that has happened to where people have, you know,
right.
traveled and gotten so hurt that when they came back, their body just couldn't heal.
Well,
And
in some of the cases, like in Singapore, for example, we're talking about hundreds of people. So um, the idea here is that you would have these predators in the astral that would come to you
right,
in the night,
shadows.
and if you don't have proper protection, would take you out. And
Yeah,
so, yes, there's different conceptions of what this thing might be, just like there's different conceptions of, the idea of fairies, for example. What we're talking about in this book is the other, and these names that we have for them, I mean, they're just constructions of our mind. I mean, they might not be very close to the truth, We don't know.
Yeah.
All that all our so-called knowledge is based on appearances, and if other intelligences can control how they appear to us, then we really know nothing. And that's what I'll leave you with. Please read the
Right.
book. There's some amazing contributors in there. Susan Demeter, Jack Hunter, of course, Joshua Cutchin, who edits and also submits an essay, and the Fairyist who runs the fairy census, Simon Young, is also a contributor. So, and so many university professionals as well, like David Floyd, are writers. So check it out, and especially read Scary Fairies, Boogeymen of Yore. If you want to get scared about the possible reality of these boogeymen that's been maybe following us throughout history. So maybe read that and then go see that Stephen King movie in June.
Yeah. Now, I have a quick thought that I wanted to run past you, Allison, because we keep talking about the fairies, and we're brought up in our generations, fairies, being the nice Disney pixies and everything. But I've read accounts where like Scotland and Ireland create on the bottom of trees little, they call them fairy gardens, and they leave offerings there and sometimes notes of like their wishes or their thoughts about something, and they find out that whatever they wish or their thought was manifests. And so I can't help wondering, like, when you talk about fairies being the familiars to the witches, if they're actually can be familiars to us and that they're actually still carrying on that tradition of making those wishes happen and those thoughts come to life. And that's the dangerous part there. That second part is because you write a message in a bad mood and you know how we always say stuff we don't mean when we get too upset. You write it down, you put it into that tree, you best hope you come to your senses before the fairy folk find it.
That's right. You have to. They are capable of anything. When you look into the lore, the traditional lore, they are capable of many things, and they're they are different cultures, and you have to be very careful about how you deal with them. And as you were saying, you have to be careful what you wish for. And I'm not saying that they can't be powerful allies. Just like when you think
Yeah.
of human intelligence, we are capable of such wonderful things and such horrors, and that's the same of the creatures of fairy. That is exactly the same. And you have to understand that they might not um, think exactly as we do. They're different intelligence, and you have to be very careful in your dealings with them and very respectful. They're
Right,
capable of anything, and they're not necessarily going to have your best interest at heart.
right. And one of the funny things of the fact for me growing up, I grew up non denominational. I did my own research on beliefs, came up with my own, and my dealings with the fairies, because I believe they're real and they're out there, was always like how I mentioned earlier in the show, being the tricksters of, like, I would set keys down in the same spot on a desk every day. I'd go to get my keys and then my keys would be missing, and I'd go, "All right, fairies, very funny. Can you please put them back where I can find them or where you found them, please?" And then it would be like within half an hour, it'd be like oh my God, how did I not see my keys right there in this spot and be able to grab them and go?
Yeah,
It's like,
that's a very common experience, Michael. And yeah, they do like to play tricks, and they do like to um, get you lost, for example.
oh
That's
yeah,
called being fairy led or pixie led. So yes, they do like to play with us for sport sometimes. And a lot of those interactions are very innocent, but sometimes they can be sinister. So just keep
oh
that
yeah,
in mind. I'm not saying that they can also be wonderful. I just want, again, there to be balance in how we consider uh, these other intelligences. And I think we are entering a different age right now with artificial intelligence. So that's going to be very interesting too, to see how that develops. And
oh
I just it's an interesting but also a frightening prospect that
yeah.
artificial intelligence is coming online so quickly and becoming such an important thing in our lives. And just like we have to be careful with the other in terms of other creatures, other societies that might be out there, we also have to watch what we're doing with artificial intelligence very carefully.
I totally 100% agree.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, and I hope
Yes,
you'll check out the book, and maybe I could be on again after you read my essay and see if it scares you or not.
well, I can tell you, not much scares me, but I am looking forward to that challenge, and I will get that book. And whether or not I get the book, you are always welcome on this show. So if we get back to you sooner, don't feel like, oh, you didn't read the book. It's like, nope, we enjoy you on the show, and so we're happy to talk with you about everything.
Well, thank you so much, Michael.
All right. Well then, boy, this night flew by.
Sure did. Well, thank you so much again for having me on. Um,
Yes,
it's time to turn the lights out. 5:30 comes early.
it does, and it was kind of funny is during the show at certain points when you were talking about stuff, I would notice the lights behind you kind of flickering, getting brighter or dimmer, and
Hmm.
it almost looked like the screen was kind of shaking a little bit a few times.
Oh, well, that's probably my fault. Might be shaking the uh the table here.
But yes, it was a great pleasure to have you on. And let's see, where am I? So next week, folks, we have George and Kara Shoplin on. And so we will share with you our outro and look forward to seeing you all next week. And yes, thank you again, Allison, for another fun and exciting episode.
Thank you.
You have just listened to the energy that surrounds us with your hosts, Michael Koff and Carla Norris. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.